views expressed on this program are those of the hosts, guests, and callers, and are not necessarily those of this station, its management, or other advertisers. You're listening to Transformation Talk Radio.
This show's audio was via a Skype call.
Welcome to Knowledge Book Radio with Marge Ptaszek. Marge was searching for the purpose of her life and the truth that would tie everything together to make sense of what was taught and what was happening on our planet, the fire that was creating all the smoke. Through many experiences, she was finally led to the knowledge book that provided all the answers. Marge is now talking about this gift to humanity on Knowledge Book Radio, so all can be united in peace, love, and harmony. This live call-in show at 1-800-930-2819 is amazing. So get ready to hear about the knowledge book. Here's your host, Marge Ptaszek.
Hello, everyone. I'm Marge Ptaszek, and you're listening to Knowledge Book Radio with Marge Ptaszek on Transformation Talk Radio. For the next hour, we will continue to cover some topics from the Knowledge Book. And this week, we've talked about the light photon cycling technique. We've talked about reading. We talked about writing. We've talked about many things. But the question remains, how does the knowledge that we get in the knowledge book, how do we actually get to it? How do we actually remember it? And what is the trick that we use to make sure that we progress on this path? Because it isn't only the knowledge book that has its effect on us. How we work with it is also very important. So today, before we start, I would like to give you my cell phone number again, 973-787-7035, to text any questions you may have. We probably will cover those questions at the next show. And the email address is mmjp99@gmail.com. This is Mary John Peter 99 @gmail.com. Our website is www.usa.thenowledgebook.net, and the Turkish website is www.dkb-mevlana.org.t for Tom R. Okay, that's for Turkey. Okay, so we will start looking at the scientific method. And we'll be looking at it from the scientific and the universal aspects. So when we look at the way we live, international air travel, international almost instant communications, having access to fresh foods from distant places and climates, easy access to ready-to-wear clothing, self-publication, television, radio, wireless, MRIs, PET scans, antibiotics, medical robots performing operations, instant access to medical history, banking systems, public transportation, etc. We rarely think about how all these innovations came about, who made them, and how the discoveries leading to the almost ubiquitous access to modern, automated, technology-driven systems came to be. When we look back even 50 years ago, some of the current advanced systems were still in the science fiction realm. When we do a little digging into the why and wherefore, we are informed that most of the technological innovations were driven by the scientific method. And of course, that leads to the next step of wanting to know what the scientific method is, how it came about, and now how it has proven to be such a tool for discovery and innovation. So what is the scientific method? First step is to look at dictionary.com for the most current definition. And it says, a method of investigation in which a problem is at first identified and observations, experiments, or other relevant data are then used to construct or test hypotheses that purport to solve it. A further definition is given, as used in medicine. The principles and empirical processes of discovery and demonstration considered characteristic of or necessary for scientific investigation, generally involving the observation of phenomena, the formulation of a hypothesis concerning the phenomena, experimentation to demonstrate the truth or faultiness of the hypothesis, and a conclusion that validates or modifies the hypothesis. This entry also includes a cultural definition of the scientific method. An orderly technique of investigation that is supposed to account for scientific progress. The method consists of the following steps. 1. Careful observations of nature. 2. Deduction of natural laws. 3. Formulation of hypotheses, generalizations of those laws to previously unobserved phenomena. 4. Experimental or observational testing of the validity of the predictions thus made. Actually, scientific discoveries rarely occur in this idealized, wholly rational, and orderly fashion. The Merriam-Webster Online Dictionary defines the scientific method as principles and procedures for the systematic pursuit of knowledge involving the recognition and formulation of a problem, the collection of data through observation and experiment, and the formulation and testing of hypotheses. It has the identical definition as www.dictionary.com from the medical aspect, and it does not have a cultural definition. We now have a basic framework of what the scientific method is and the 3 flavors it comes in, or how it is interpreted differently and understood in different contexts. Our next questions were, how did it come about? Why is it so effective in innovation and discovery? The answer to these questions, to answer these questions, we need to go back in time. It is generally accepted that Babylonian, Indian, and Egyptian astronomers, mathematicians, and physicians developed what we call empirical thinking. However, the Greeks initially developed what we would call the scientific method. Though we need to keep in mind that much, if not most, of the knowledge about what was known in ancient Egypt was lost when the great library in Alexandria was destroyed. At first, Greek philosophers like Plato did not believe in measurements or calculations and relegated these fields, plus geometry, to the artisans and craftsmen. Plato's premise was that knowledge could be derived by pure reasoning, and that everything we see is but the imperfect reflection of its ideal form that exists in the invisible realm. On the contrary, Aristotle, who studied with Plato and is usually depicted as the father of science, held that empirical measurement and building on knowledge already in place would provide the best basis for understanding and explaining natural phenomena. In Aristotle's view, it is the actual measurement and observation that form the foundation of knowledge when combined with inductive thinking and reasoning. He applied this method he devised to everything he studied, from poetry and politics to astronomy and natural history. He used meticulous observations and measurements for everything. He scrutinized over 500 species. The basis of his treatise on politics was a study he conducted of 158 Greek city-states. This, of course, was completely antithetical to Plato, who produced the idea of a perfect republic based on his idea of perfection, ignoring any existing systems. To sum up Aristotle's method: 1. Study what others have written about the subject. 2. Look for a general consensus about the subject. 3. Perform a systematic study of everything, even partially related to the topic. This was the beginning of a scientific method that included literature reviews, consensus, and measurement. It was also the Greeks that subdivided and named the branches of science that we recognize today, such as physics, biology, politics, zoology, and poetry. Library cataloging was introduced for the first time at the library in Alexandria. This, of course, was essential for doing a peer review. The next influence and development of the scientific method came from the Muslim philosophers. Not only did they preserve the knowledge of ancient Greece, they also increased it and enabled the forming of a scientific method that current modern scientists and philosophers would recognize. The Islamic scholar Ibn al-Haytham produced the Book of Optics. He was the one who formulated a scientific method close to our current one. 1. State an explicit problem based upon observation and experimentation. 2. Test or criticize a hypothesis through experimentation. 3. Interpret the data and come to a conclusion, ideally using mathematics. 4. Publish the findings. He was the one who understood that having controlled and very systematic experiments and measurements were indispensable to discover new knowledge based on previous, already known knowledge. He also added the concept that the ultimate truth can only be reached by questioning everything, even generally accepted and held tenets. Other scholars build upon al-Haytham's scientific method by refining and preserving it. Al-Biruni, who observed that humans can make mistakes and do not always have a non-biased view, added the idea that experiments need to be repeated and replicated many times to verify that the results originally obtained are reproducible. Al-Raghwi was the first scholar to introduce and use a peer review process that we can recognize as such today. Ethics of the Physician, written by Al-Raghwi, laid out a process to ensure that the physicians documented their procedures and allowed others to review and scrutinize them. The task of reviewing and deciding whether malpractice occurred was done by other physicians. Abu Jabir, often spoken of as the father of chemistry, first introduced controlled experiments and separated alchemy from superstition and brought chemistry into the rational world of empirical measurement. Ibn Sina, as one of the titans in the history of science, introduced the concept that there could be two ways to arrive at first principles. A first principle is a basic, foundational, self-evident proposition or assumption that cannot be deduced from any other proposition or assumption. This was promulgated in Aristotelian philosophies. Consensus in science was introduced by other Islamic scholars, aimed to eliminate fringe ideas and allowed an open review and, combined with the contributions to the scientific method, produced an Islamic golden age of science. After this, the Islamic impacts on the scientific method declined. The development of the scientific method was then enhanced by the European scholars, who appropriated the Greek and Muslim knowledge and enhanced it further. Although there are many scholars who impacted science and the scientific method, we can name a few like Roger Bacon, Francis Bacon, Galileo, Copernicus, René Descartes, and Sir Isaac Newton. These scholars spanned from the time of the Renaissance and brought us closer to current times. Roger Bacon came forth with the idea of first making observations, then forming a hypothesis and creating experiments to test the hypotheses. He also documented his experimental methods and outcomes meticulously so that others could duplicate and verify his results. Francis Bacon moved the scientific method forward by his emphasis on induction or prove at least one case for the hypotheses tested, and then use the same process to prove another case. If two separate variables are inserted into the experiments, and the experiments are carried out exactly the same way, and the results are the same for both cases, then the hypothesis can be accepted as being proven. His was the thought that experimental evidence could be used to eliminate conflicting theories, thereby getting closer to the truth. René Descartes, however, believed that the universe was a huge machine. Once you know the principle of how one thing works, what the law of the universe is, then you can deduce how the rest will work as well. One of his main precepts was skepticism. He formulated that everything is to be doubted until proven. His main ideas by which scientific progress can be made are: 1. Never accept anything as true until all reasons for doubt can be ruled out. 2. Divide problems into as many parts as possible and necessary to prove an adequate solution. 3. Thoughts should be ordered, starting with the simplest and easiest to know, ascending little by little and step by step to more complex knowledge. 4. Make enumerations so complete and reviews so general that nothing is omitted. Although Galileo is usually remembered for his gravity experiment, he was also a major contributor to the scientific method. Physicists such as Einstein and Hawking stated that he is the father of modern science. He was very instrumental in organizing physics and basing it on a mathematical construct and mathematical theorems. And although the split between the invisible and the visible was first documented with the work of Plato and Aristotle, it is Galileo who is attributed to the start of the split between religion and science. Galileo standardized measurements so experimental results could be verified anywhere. In effect, everyone was now using the same measuring stick. His emphasis was on inductive reasoning, since he believed the derived experimental outcomes could never perfectly match the outcome predicted by theories, as it was impossible to account for every existing variable. For example, in theory, both a feather and a metal ball should fall at the same rate from the same height. However, this cannot be proven in normal world circumstances because of friction, limited timing methods, and air resistance could not be accurately measured and accounted for. However, should this same experiment be repeated many times in many places, then the data collected from them all could become a mass of data from which a conclusion or theory can be extrapolated. The Royal Society, composed of experts to advise and guide, was formed in 1660, was a body that oversaw the spread of information and established a journal to help in this process. It is this journal, plus the panel of experts, that eventually led to establishing the full and real peer review process that is currently in place. It is the Royal Society that ruled that experimental evidence always supersedes theoretical evidence. To this day, only empirical evidence is accepted as being true or representing the truth. When someone goes to the doctor and explains the symptoms and the experience that caused the doctor's visit, this is rejected as experiential and therefore discounted. This scientific revolution reached a peak with Isaac Newton, who can be seen as making the greatest contribution to the history of the scientific method. He was the first to thoroughly understand that the scientific method must include both deduction and induction. And the scientific method was the main driver of scientific discoveries for 3 centuries. However, this was also the time when the scholars had great depth of knowledge in what we now consider multiple disciplines. They could be considered to have a Doctor of Philosophy, Ph. degree, in philosophy, mathematics, theology, physics, etc. As science came to discover more and more data and get more and more knowledge, the areas of study became more compartmentalized and the scholars became specialists in a particular field of study. Science was split into separate fields of chemistry, physics, biology, psychology, etc. As each field became larger, it also had different needs for coming up with theories and trying to prove them. The scientific method that may have worked with physics did not seem to fit the needs of psychology. Testing the physics theory a body in motion tends to stay in motion, while a body at rest tends to stay at rest, works just fine with the scientific method. But applying this in mathematical terms to know how the human and the human mind works become a bit more complicated. So, different fields of study started to implement their own flavor of the scientific method to fit their specific needs. Eventually, the word scientific in the scientific method needed to be understood and defined, because how can the theories of Einstein, produced by thought experiments, be viewed as scientific when no empirical data was used or produced? And how can psychological studies and experiments not be considered science when theories are based on observations, are then tested, and produce empirical data? We have now reached the level where each field has its own flavor of the scientific method particular to itself, as seen in the dictionary definition of general, medical, and cultural, for example, yet the basis of which is true to the basic descriptions of the scientific method. The scientific method is generally accepted as having these steps. 1. Make an observation or many observations. Something is noticed. Some particular situation occurs for which there is no immediate explanation. 2. Formulate a question, identify a problem, or state an objective. This step allows a specific experiment to be designed to answer this question. 3. Research the topic. Learn as much as you can about the topic to identify previous knowledge about this topic. 4. Formulate a hypothesis. This is a formal prediction. There are 2 types. One is an if-then statement. For example, if plants grow under a red light, then they will grow taller under a white light. The other is a null hypothesis, or a no difference hypothesis. For example, there is no difference in plant growth between a red light and a white light. 5. Design and perform an experiment to test the hypotheses. Here, variables are needed, and an experiment is set up, and ways to measure the results are formulated. These are independent variables controlled by the experimenter. And dependent variables, these are the results, the outcomes of the experiment that are then measured. 6. Record and analyze the data you obtain. You obtain from the experiment. Make notes of anything that occurred, whether usual or unusual, expected or unexpected. Analyze the data to come to a conclusion. 7. Determine whether the original hypothesis can be accepted or rejected. 8. Draw a conclusion and report the results of the experiment. Put simply, this is the process, the method by which we have analyzed and discovered, although not completely, how we and the universe works, the laws by which the universe and we function. We still have a long way to go before we completely, solely, through humanity's efforts, understand how our brains function, what exists in the depths of the oceans covering our planet, what allows the crude matter forms, bodies, to have consciousness, to think, to explore and discover, and how it all started and where it is going, and what the purpose of it all is. But the scientific method is getting us closer and closer to the truth. We may ask, so what's the big deal? Why does it matter to have a methodology delineated? Why do or did we keep a history of what we've done over time? What has formulating, enhancing, and using the scientific method produced? Well, this is the process, this is the method that we have used to analyze and to discover how both we and the universe works, and how we have been able to produce and discover all those beautiful functionalities, all the beautiful systems we currently have in use today. So let's explore a few examples. Alexander Fleming discovered penicillin using the scientific method. He was actually trying to discover the different aspects of growth of a specific bacterium that caused sore throats, Staphylococcus. So he prepared a substrate, the food, for growing this bacteria in petri dishes. He then inoculated the petri dishes with the bacteria and left them to grow. Much to his surprise and chagrin, some of his petri dishes were ruined by a blue fungus. Apparently, the fungus liked the food as well and decided to have a free dinner. Most people would have thrown out the ruined petri dishes, but being a keen observer, he noticed that no bacteria were found around the blue fungus, and that in the petri dishes where no fungus was found, the bacteria were happily living and spreading. This observation led to his asking my favorite question, why? What's going on between the fungus and the bacteria that the bacteria doesn't adjoin the fungus? Based on his observation and question, he formulated a hypothesis. Fungal colonies can produce some chemicals that inhibits bacterial growth. He then designed an experiment to test this theory. He prepared the substrate solution for the bacteria that was successful in promoting the Staphylococcus growth. But he first allowed fungus to grow in one substrate for a few days and did not inoculate the fungus into another substrate. He then filtered the fungus out of the substrate and inoculated both substrates with the bacteria. After a few days, he collected the data. The substrate where the fungus was previously present showed no bacterial growth, while this other substrate showed bacterial growth. He then concluded that the substrate in which the fungus was first grown must contain some chemicals, some fungal growth product that inhibited the growth of bacteria. He proved his hypothesis through the experiments he had designed. He, of course, reported the results and eventually was able to isolate the chemical compound that inhibited bacterial growth and then produce it. This discovery, named penicillin, became the wonder drug because millions of lives were saved due to using this antibiotic to treat bacterial wound infection. And again, it was the scientific method that found many different kinds of antibiotics that allowed many types of sicknesses to be cured. Another example, the discovery of vaccines through the work done by Edward Jenner. How did this happen? He was struck by an observation made by a dairymaid that she would never have smallpox because she already had cowpox. The same belief was held by many other dairy workers. Smallpox killed 30% of those infected with the disease, and those that survived were left scarred with deep pits in their skin. Cowpox, on the other hand, is a cattle disease, usually mild, and can spread to humans via sores on the udder. Based on this observation, he formulated a hypothesis that an infection from cowpox could protect against smallpox. Once he had the hypothesis, he then proceeded to formulate an experiment to see whether it could be proven or disproven. The experiment consisted of scratching some material from a cowpox sore into the arm of an 8-year-old boy. The boy felt ill for a few days, but recovered completely. A few days later, Jenner then scratched some matter from a smallpox sore into the boy's arm. The result? The boy did not contract smallpox, and he then tested his ideas on other humans and published his findings. Jenner repeated this experiment many times, obtaining the same results, and other scientists also repeated this experiment with the same results. The vaccination spread over the entire planet, and eventually, in 1980, the World Health Organization declared that smallpox had been eliminated from the planet. All vaccines discovered since then have been based on Jenner's work. There are many more examples we can go through. The discovery that disease is caused by microbes, the steam engine, telephone, light bulb, television, cell phones, space travel, instant coffee, post-it notes, the periodic table, evolution, discovery that nerves communicate by chemical messengers, DNA structure, cells, the list goes on and on. In the scientific method, the premise is observation, hypothesis, experiment, analysis of data, and conclusion. A linear and or circular progression. It's a process of deduction. Discoveries, however, are also made by taking the products of the breakdown of materials into component parts and recombining them to produce something completely different, original, and having very different properties. Synthesis is a combining of two or more results from analysis and combining them into something more complex. It is the combination of separate parts into a different whole. An example of this is nylon. A team led by Wallace Carruthers set out to research commercial applications for polymers, large building block molecules now being used in everything from tennis shoes to CDs. The team produced the polymer by combining a crystalline substance that could easily bond with acids and adipic acid. This combination, this synthesis, produced strands of material that could then be spun into a plastic thread. This discovery eventually led to nylon being used as an inexpensive substitute for silk. The first application was the production of nylon stockings to replace silk stockings. Eventually, nylon became the basic building block of toothbrushes, umbrellas, fishing line, windbreakers, camping tents, gloves, kites, dog collars, guitar strings and picks, toys, racket strings, medical implants, and the list goes on and on. Polymers themselves were first discovered at the beginning of the 20th century, and this new study is called polymer science or macromolecular science, itself a subfield of materials science. And here we seem to be going back to the scholars of earlier times where a multidiscipline base is necessary, since polymer science required a multiple discipline background in chemistry, physics, and engineering. However, synthesis is not limited to science and manufacture of goods and materials. Nature is an expert in synthesis, as it is nature's synthesis of basic components that allows everything that exists to actually exist. Plants accomplish photosynthesis by using light as a catalyst to form complex organic molecule of carbon, water, and minerals. Our bodies themselves are an analysis and synthesis machine. At first, we take in larger compounds, like food and liquid and air, break these down to what the bodies need, distributed these molecules to different areas of our bodies, where they are then combined to produce something that does not look like and has different characteristics than the original components. Our cells produce the basic building blocks of our bodies by synthesizing proteins from the simpler amino acids. Although the body can produce some amino acids, most of them are the product of analysis or breakdown of the foods we eat. And in turn, the proteins are then synthesized into larger aggregates, like a muscle cell, a blood cell, a brain cell, etc. We are all familiar with bread, with cakes, with pizza, with noodles, etc. Cooking is a myriad of ways of taking basic elements that, of course, are a synthesis of smaller components and synthesizing, combining them in different proportions to produce original creations. Let's just look at bread. Using different combinations of flour, water, fats, eggs, and yeast, that undergo a different process and different mode of heat application produces either matzah or pizza or a French baguette or a noodle soup or a birthday cake. It seems that the scientific method is actually a combination of analysis and synthesis. At first, it takes things apart, and then it combines them into something new and original. The process by which we arrived at the currently used scientific method was the scientific method. Someone observed that the scientific method then in use did not cover all the bases and proposed a way to address it, then analyzed the results to reach a conclusion. Whether we are aware of it or not, we use this process every day. Although we may generally know what colors to wear for us to look and feel good from other sources, we experiment to see what was recommended and if what was actually recommended works for us. Although we may hear advice on what to do and how to do it, we analyze the recommendation, form an idea of what needs to be done, and then test it out, and then either implement the recommendation, reject it, or somehow modify it so it suits our need to get the desired outcome. The brilliant minds that developed and evolved the scientific method had deep observation and analytical abilities. But how about the rest of us? How are we educated and how do we learn? Initially, our parents tell us, "It's hot, don't touch," or "Soup too hot, wait until it cools down." Does there exist a child that automatically obeys? Most of us look at the stove, see that it does not look any different than before when we had previously touched it without any ill effects, and we go ahead and touch, thereby testing our hypotheses. And of course, we find that the parents did not lie, and we burn our fingers. And we may come to the conclusion that parents do not lie when giving warnings about a hot stove, and that the appearance of the stove does not indicate whether the stove is hot or not. Or we may decide that next time we hear that warning, we may just very gently touch the stove to test it, as opposed to putting our whole hand on the stove. In the case of the soup, some of us would listen since we've gone through the hot stove experience, but some of us may have decided that the hot stove was our parents' lucky guess and go ahead and take a spoonful of soup. Result, burned lips and tongue. Our hypothesis of a lucky guess was completely off the mark, and maybe the conclusion reached now is that we will pay more attention to what our parents have to say. Or we may have noticed the steam rising from the soup and guessed that the steam is maybe an indicator of the soup's temperature. Then we test this hypothesis by waiting until we don't see any steam, and then take a spoonful of soup and find that, indeed, the soup was good to eat without any ill effects. Or we may have observed that others at the table were blowing on the soup and eating sooner than we, since we were waiting for it to cool down on its own. Or we may have learned from our parents that you can blow on the soup to cool it off more quickly. It appears that the scientific method or analysis and synthesis is something that we can do on our own. We actually need to do on our own to incorporate the skills needed to survive and flourish. We get information about a subject and our brains immediately start comparing it to knowledge we already have. Does the new information replace or modify what we know? Does it agree or negate some tenet we hold dear? Is it such a completely foreign idea that we have no way of understanding it at all? This analysis then leads us to some kind of idea, and then to testing this idea, and then coming to a conclusion. As we grow and develop, we find that our ideas change, our beliefs change, and our behavior changes. We learn through experience that the behavior of a 2-year-old is not acceptable and does not produce favorable results when we are 10 years old, or a 10-year-old's understanding and behavior is not appropriate for a 30-year-old, etc. And then one day, having gone through all kinds of learning experiences, our curiosity is piqued by someone mentioning that new knowledge is being brought by the knowledge book. Or we may meet someone at some kind of event where the knowledge book is present. And although we have seen large books before, this one seems both intriguing and intimidating. And we may blurt out, "Wow, this is huge. How can anyone ever find enough time to actually finish reading this?" At that point, we are given some characteristics of the knowledge book, why it is here now, what its purpose is, and maybe what it can do for us. And we may be given either one or some of the chapters from the knowledge book as free samples, so we can test our hypothesis that the book is certainly too big to ever finish and must be too hard to understand to even attempt it. However, based on previous experiences, we take the samples, go home, and put them on the shelf to wait until we had the time to read them. Eventually, we come across the chapters and decide to read at least a few pages. And we wind up reading the first chapter. Conclusion? Well, some of the ideas presented are completely foreign, but there are concepts that we've heard before and totally understand. And we decide to read the rest of the sample chapters to see if there is any light shed on the first chapter, whether we can recognize any concepts presented there. But we have the same experience. We understand some, can identify some that we've already known, and most of that we don't understand at all. We call the person who gave us the sample, talk for a while, and decide to take the plunge to buy the knowledge book. We start reading, a chapter at a time, and we start noticing things. In one place, the knowledge book says it's not a religious book. In another place, it says it's the last religious book. And in still another place, it says it's a sacred book. And in yet another place, it's a book of science and learning. So the question arises, which of these statements is true? Each of them contradicts the other. We call the person who gave the examples again and present the situation we're in. The person is sympathetic, understanding, and says, unbelievably, all the statements are true. Hearing our exclamation of surprise, the person continues, well, I could give you the answer on how the statements are correct and how they connect, but it's also so much more fun if you'll be so proud of yourself once you figure it out on the answer on your own. In addition, we no longer need any intermediary to explain things to us. The knowledge book is our direct teacher and guide, and we can do this on our own. And that understanding somehow depends on evolution, and we can forget about it for now and just keep reading. So we keep reading, and we find eventually the connecting link that makes the contradictory statements about the knowledge book true. And that's when the real fun starts. Now we start to notice more things, have more questions, arrive at a theory, test the theory, either by reading other books or keep on reading the knowledge book to see if we have reached a valid understanding. And as we're reading the same word or the same phrase in different places and in different contexts in the knowledge book, we have more questions, and the next thing we know, our brain connects these contexts when we encounter a phrase of a sentence, and we get the answer we were looking for. And a whole new knowledge is revealed, and a bigger picture, a new dimension, is opened to us because we've come to a valid interpretation of the knowledge. And we are using the skills of analysis and synthesis that we've been using throughout our lives in putting the pieces of the knowledge book puzzle together, and we get more knowledge, more understanding, and a bigger picture about ourselves, others, the universe, and all that is develops. When the knowledge book talks about science and learning, when it talks about analysis and synthesis, it is not advocating something strange or unusual or something that we'd never done or heard of. The same process, the scientific method that the brilliant minds use to innovate and to create, is exactly the same process that we utilized to arrive at the person we are at present. And it is exactly the same method that we use in order to solve the puzzle of the knowledge book and get a clearer and clearer picture of how things are, how they came to be, and how they will continue to progress. And eventually, we come to realize that the time process that science has used, that the same process that the science has used to form new constructs from already existing forms is the same process that plants use to continue to live. The same process the body uses to continue its life, the same process by which we combine previously learned elements and arrive at new understanding and can then use that understanding to act differently and possibly take a step in a different direction. And it is the process of the scientific method of analysis and synthesis that all of creation, all the complex living forms that exist today, from the micro to the macro, came to be. It is the same process by which one became 1,000, and it is the same process by which a single energy particle became the human of today. And by using the same process and through the energies and frequencies given in the knowledge book, by following the path designed, the knowledge book studies that the human of today is currently undergoing regeneration and evolution to become a superhuman that gets to leave this concrete universe and go home. And now it looks like it's time for a break. We'll take a short break. To remind you once again, cell phone number is 973-787-7035. Email is mmjp99@gmail.com. Mary John Peter 99@gmail.com. And it's time to go for a break. We'll wrap up for a little bit and stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Integrate spirituality into your everyday lives on Universe Soul Heart Radio. Tune in each month on Transformation Talk Radio as Kathleen Johnson explores the concept of sensible spirituality, keeping you grounded, connected, and centered on the path to wholeness. Kathleen has dedicated her life to facilitating holistic healing and wholeness in others. Listen to Universe Soul Heart Radio and learn how to flourish, grow, and impact all we do on planet Earth. For more information, go to universesoulheart.net.
Stay juicy. Tune in to Your Juicy Love with me, Una Drake, co-hosting monthly with Dr. Pat, and every second Monday at 12 p.m. on Transformation Talk Radio. My show, Your Juicy Love, helps you find the dynamic, life-affirming love you've always wanted. Transform your relationships and bring peace, joy, and juicy, juicy love to planet Earth. For more information, visit unadrake.com.
The Janice Underwood Show, helping you create the life you want, not the life you tolerate. Tune in each Monday, 9 a.m. Pacific on Transformation Talk Radio as Janice delves into the life creator system and the next step in your spiritual evolution. Janice Underwood is gifted at helping spiritually minded people shift their mindsets to unleash the creator within. Our souls wish to wake us up. Those of us listening hear the call. Do you? For more information, visit janiceunderwood.com.
Are you stuck in unhealthy habits, toxic relationships, or low self-esteem? Do you crave a life of inspiration, love, self-acceptance, and fun? Sounds like you're on the verge to your next big thing. Join Laura Richer, host of On the Verge Radio, helping you use your breakdown for a breakthrough, overcome life's greatest challenges, and live the life you want and deserve. Tune in each month on Transformation Talk Radio or visit SeattleHealingHypnosis.com for more information.
Wow. Hey, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to the Dr. Pat Show. This is Talk Radio to Thrive By. I'm telling you, I got to pinch myself some days because when each of us gets called to do something that we so not thought was in our wheelhouse to do for a purpose that's so much greater than us, we get to show up and shine.
If you would like to show up and shine on the Dr. Pat Show as a co-host or sponsor, send us an email to inspire@thedrpatshow.com.
Choose the new earth on the Cornelia Stephanie Show. Tune in each week on Transformation Talk Radio as Cornelia takes listeners on an odyssey of higher consciousness to inspire, educate, and empower. Cornelia guides people on the path of self-healing, peace, and liberation. The Cornelia Stephanie Show is your catalyst for anchoring heaven on earth on a global scale. For more information, go to corneliastephanie.com.
And we're back on Knowledge Book Radio with Marge Ptaszek on Transformation Talk Radio. And again, let's thank you for listening. Reminder, the website is www.usa.theknowledgebook.net. Turkish website where the reading schedule is www.dkb-mevlana.org.tr. And that's David Knowledge Book, the DKB-Mevlana. That's where the reading schedule is, and the website itself is in Turkish and in English, so you can get the information, different information, additional information there. Okay, so what we've been doing this past hour is going over the scientific method. And though it may seem that the scientific method is something that only the scientists use, and it is only something that is esoteric and outside of ourselves and has nothing to do with us, in fact, it is something that we use every day. I know when people go to work, a lot of times the discussion goes around about, okay, what do we have for lunch today? Should we go here? Should we go there? Should we go somewhere else? And the biggest decision seems to be for that day, what to eat for lunch or what to eat for dinner. And again, we go into this process of analysis and synthesis, of breaking things down. Well, we went there, remember, we got tomato poisoning. And we went there, the food was too not so hot, it wasn't good. Went someplace else, it was kind of a dirty environment, never served us on time. So we go through this process of figuring out, based on previous experience, previous knowledge, and we arrive at conclusions, and using those conclusions, we do a particular action or don't do a particular action. And eventually we do figure out where we want to go eat, and we start the process all over again. So when it comes to getting knowledge out of the knowledge book, the important thing is to make an observation, to actually have a question, because that's how the knowledge book works. For you to get an answer from the knowledge book, you need to have a question in your mind. You need to have a question, just like this person that we use an example, said, wait a minute, those 4 different statements, completely contradictory to each other. It's a religious but not a religious book. It's a sacred but it's not a sacred book. It's a book of learning and science. How do they all fit together? If you have that question in your head as you're reading, then you will notice the answer. The answer will be perfectly obvious because it'll come popping out of the page at you. And step by step, this is how the knowledge book opens itself up. And it also opens up depending on your experiences. And if you remember, we had the program on karma once upon a time. And in karma, we learned lessons. And again, through these karmas, we learned how to behave, how to not behave, how to do what we're supposed to do and learn life lessons, in which case we go up the evolution ladder, in which case we are now at a higher frequency, and also that knowledge at a particular frequency in the knowledge book now becomes available to us. Because the knowledge book accesses an infinite amount of energies and frequencies, but gives to us only those energies and frequencies that are perfectly situated for ourselves at that particular point in time. And step by step, we grow in evolution, we are able to access higher frequencies and therefore get higher knowledge, and we have a deeper and greater understanding. So that's about time we have for this time on Knowledge Book Hour Radio. So I'd like to remind you, we still have the focal point going on in New York City. Stop by on Saturday night, 7 p.m. If you'd like to get the 3 introductory chapters from the knowledge book, please do email us. We'll be happy to send them to you. And again, Mrs. Chirac and the system always tells us that humanity's verdict is in humanity's hands. And you are the ones who will save the world. So once again, thank you for listening. All the best wishes to you. Until we meet next week at the same time in the same station. Thank you.
You've been listening to Knowledge Book Radio with Marge Ptaszek. Marge was led to the Knowledge Book, a gift to humanity, and its time of transition to the Golden Age that provided the truth in energies and frequencies. Now, she shares information from and answers questions about the Knowledge Book with you each Tuesday at 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern on TransformationTalkRadio.com. For more information, visit Marge at usa.theknowledgebook.net.